I'm Cynthia James, and this network is about changing lives one woman at a time. Hello and welcome to Women Awakening. I'm your host, Cynthia James, and I get the extraordinary honor of bringing women to you, women who are change makers, women who have taken control of their lives, women who have decided to step into their greatness and be models for us all, because they're not exceptions. They are just showing us possibility. And so I'm grateful that I get to do this for you every week. We are on Spotify, iTunes, iHeart, Spreaker, Amazon, YouTube video. So just subscribe and come back every week and meet somebody incredible. I'm really honored today because I'm meeting someone new. Her name is Molly Sider. She is the creator and host of I Am This Age. It's a podcast proving you're never too old to make a big change. We will be talking about that. So Molly has been making her own changes throughout her 40s, including transitioning from being a longtime wine professional, we'll talk about that too, to a podcaster and a certified professional life coach. She's a storyteller and believes that the most efficient way to create peace in the world and within yourself is by sharing your story and listening to other people share theirs. So her favorite thing to do is to coach people into revealing their true identity and life purpose through, of course, their stories. Hi, Molly. Welcome.
Hi, Cynthia. It's so nice to be here. That was such a nice intro. Thank you.
I'm so happy to meet you. And so we're going to start with your story. Where did you come from? How did you grow up?
Oh my goodness. So I grew up in the suburbs of Chicago, and I was this like painfully shy child. I like clung to my mom's leg. And I think that was at the time perceived as, lacking in intelligence, of not smart. And that was the story that I was told and I believed, because why wouldn't I have believed that? I was a child. And then sort of throughout my childhood and my life, like sort of just found evidence like, oh, this is true. This must be true. For example, in school, I remember I was always really afraid to ask questions. And for those who know me, know that I have an insatiable curiosity. I mean, all I do is ask questions, and now I do it openly and freely and, with enthusiasm. But back then I was afraid to ask questions. I was often told by my parents, like, stop asking so many questions, and I internalized that as, you're asking stupid questions, stop. Or in school, I would be afraid to ask questions. And I remember thinking like, well, no, I don't understand something about this lesson, but no one else in the class is asking anything. So clearly everybody else gets it. Everyone else must understand it, and I just don't. And so I'm stupid. And I wouldn't ask the question. And I remember like laughing at a joke that I was like, I don't think joke is funny. Why? But everyone else is laughing. Am I missing something? Like things like that. And then like hindsight, looking back, I'm like, no, that joke just wasn't actually funny. I fully understand. Like that type of stuff. And as I started to get older, I started to get a little bit braver, and I would start to ask, questions. And so often the response would be like, that's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. Or somebody else would be like, oh, yeah. I actually have the same question. I didn't understand that either. And I started to learn. I started to gain some confidence, because I'm like, okay, wait, so I'm not alone in this. And the moment I started to speak up, I learned, okay, I'm not alone. I'm not the only one in the room who's feeling this way. And so I sort of started playing with that. And eventually I I was an English literature major, creative writing, in college, and later after college discovered storytelling. Actually, much later, like in my late 30s, discovered this medium of like getting up on a stage and telling true personal narratives. So if you've ever listened to The Moth, have you ever heard of The Moth?
Yeah, I love it. I love their stories.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so fun. So that type of storytelling.
Right.
And I always thought like, oh, I love this. This is my medium because I like to write and all that stuff. But I also, this is another little aside. Like I grew up dancing and singing and acting, and I like, even though I was painfully shy, I loved doing that stuff and like being on stage. There was like enough of like a disconnect or like a wall up between me and whomever was watching in the audience. So I loved it. So I thought, ooh, like getting up on a stage and telling a story, like I can do that. Um, and also simultaneously was like, but I don't have anything to say. Like, what am I nobody cares about my story. I don't matter. Uh, I'm not, I can't think of anything. That's never going to happen. And then I eventually found a storytelling class here in Chicago. It happens to be like a big storytelling community here. Who knew? But I found a class and I took it and I started telling stories on stages, and it changed my life.
Right.
Because what you realize or what I realized was, the minute I tell a personal story and I'm willing to get vulnerable and talk about what I was afraid of in that moment, what I was feeling, whatever it was, I would like, anytime I would get scared to tell a story, or anytime even now I get scared to tell a story, I'm like, there's somebody in this room, in this audience, who has felt exactly what I'm feeling. I know for a fact. I know because back in the day when I started asking questions and somebody was like, oh, I have the same question I didn't understand, and they just weren't speaking up, so I'm going to be that person. I'm going to speak up because there's someone in this room who's going to feel the same way that I'm feeling. And so that's what I do now. So that's sort of to get us to here is, encouraging and empowering and motivating people to get comfortable with their stories, telling their stories. Basically, talk about yourself.
Yeah. Well, this is all very interesting. So do you believe in synchronicity?
Yeah.
So when I was a child, I was shy, except I sang and I danced and I created things like that, right?
Oh, see?
Right. So the
Proves
reason
my
I said
point.
that is because I really feel like when you open up, you start pulling in people and attracting people that have the same vibration and frequency and are wanting to do similar things in the world. So I want to talk about what's the power of the story for you?
Excuse me. Well, I think the power of the story is kind of exactly those two things, what you just said and what I was talking about is really, it's creating connection and community, right? The minute you tell a story, like what I just told you this story, and you were immediately like, oh my God, we're the same. Like synchronicity. Look at us. I had the same experience growing up. Now we're connected.
Right.
We created this community of the two of us feeling the same feelings. We understand each other. We don't have the same story, of course. The details of our story are different, but the emotions that we were feeling, the fears that we were feeling are probably pretty similar.
Yeah.
And that is so powerful because I have this like motto I always say, like, if you go to my website, the first thing you'll see is, we can't do life alone. We're not supposed to do life alone. And what a relief we don't have to, we can't get anywhere alone.
Right.
And so the power of the story is exactly that, creating that connection, that community, so that you're like, okay, now that I've told this story, somebody else has reacted and was like, oh, I have been there. I felt that, or I felt something very similar to what you felt. All of a sudden, we don't feel so alone. We can talk more openly about it. We can air out all of those like fears, insecurities, whatever the story is that we're telling ourselves, because of course, we mostly tell ourselves stories, right?
Right.
Um, so we can air all that out and let it go. And when we do that, we're letting go of all of that energy that we're using up to, cover up, hide, pretend, whatever it is. And now we get to take all that unused energy and place it towards whatever it is that we really want to be doing in the world. It's like
Yes.
energy and resilience. It's like currency. It's
Yes.
precious.
Yeah.
Use it wisely.
Yeah, totally, 100%. So, all right. So I get the storytelling class and I getting up, I'm always fascinated by the moth hour and how the people get up and tell such fabulous stories. So I want to know though, okay, how do you get from storytelling class and knowing that you're comfortable on a stage and you want to share and build community to being a life coach? What's the bridge?
Right. Okay. Good. I thought you were going to ask me something completely different. Um, good question. So the bridge for me was, there was sort of like an overlapping bridges. But the storytelling started. I was already doing a lot of like personal growth work, mindfulness, research, lots of reading, lots of listening to podcasts, lots of working with coaches and therapists, and taking deep dives. And on top of that, I had this idea for a podcast, which I needed. I started for me because I needed this information. I listened to a lot of podcasts. I was approaching 40. I wasn't in the place that I necessarily wanted to be in or thought I would be in by that age. And I was like, oh no. Did I screw up? Did I miss my chance to like have a happy, successful, quote unquote, successful, fulfilling life? Like, is this it for me? And I was like desperate for some sort of representation from somebody like me, but a little bit older, who was living outside of the box, who, maybe never got married, never had kids, and was like happy as a bee. So, I don't think that's a phrase, but anyway, happy as a clam. I don't know.
Think they're happy.
Whatever. Anyway, so when I was obsessed with podcasts, I couldn't find it I really wanted it in podcast form, couldn't find it anywhere, couldn't believe it. And I was like, well, I guess I'm going to have to start my own podcast. Also, I have no idea how to start a podcast. I don't know how that works. So I sat on that idea for a couple of years before I did it because I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't have the confidence to try. And that overlapped with, I had already been doing storytelling for a little while, but was gaining more confidence in just speaking and getting up on stages in front of people. And then, so those two things overlapped with the, just wanting personal growth, like, oh my God, I need to, I really need to get on this. I'm not happy where I am right now. And I don't have a choice anymore, but to like really take a deep dive into why and what's going on and what I need to live, the life that I want. All of those things sort of combined into, oh, I'm going to be a life coach. Oh, and I forgot about the wine part. I also was in the wine industry, as you mentioned, for a really long time, and I loved it for a really long time. And I also
Were you selling it? Were you tasting? What were you doing?
I've worked on every side of the wine industry you could think of. I have worked in restaurants. I started in restaurants. I was a wine buyer at a very like high-end collector's retail shop when I lived in New York for a long time. I moved to Chicago and I worked for an importer / distributor as a portfolio manager, and I did sales. I've also made wine. I've worked harvests in California, New York, and in Italy. I've done it all. I love
and wine. You just liked wine and wanted to know more?
Yeah. Yeah. I grew up around wine. My grandfather was a big wine collector. So I grew up with we would have like 5 bottles of wine on the table, every time we were at their house for dinner. I grew up my first sip of wine, I think I was probably 5. And I have this memory of sitting at my grandparents' kitchen table while they were like getting ready for dinner. And my grandfather, like my feet couldn't even touch the floor. My grandfather would pour me like a tiny bit of wine and my sister a tiny bit of wine. And we would like, he would open up just a can of like, smoked oysters, like those, like whatever you can get at the grocery store. And he had those like little different colored plastic toothpicks, and we would just like be, sticking the toothpicks in, eating these smoked oysters as a 5-year-old and drinking wine. I mean, this is how I grew up. And I grew up playing in his wine cellar. It was underneath the floorboards in his laundry room. Like we had to climb underneath like the floor and like sit around and like wheel. It was so fun for a little kid. Anyway, so I grew up around that. So I eventually started working in restaurants. I was waiting tables, and I was waiting tables at a fancy restaurant where I had to know about wine, and I had to learn about wine. And I was like, this is interesting. I like this. This is fun. And that eventually led into an actual career in the wine industry. And I loved it. I still love it.
Right.
Yeah.
But so that was how you were making money.
Yeah.
And were you making money being on stages?
No.
Okay. Okay. But I know podcasts, when you start out, you don't make money. I got that. Okay. Right. So you're a seeker. You've been a seeker your whole life. And so did you start noticing that people could use your support, but you needed more skills?
Oh, yeah. And I'm, yes, absolutely that. And I am, I'm somebody who values like experience and education and, certifications and things like that. So that's when I was like, all right, I'm going to actually study this and I'm going to get certified so that I can go out into the world and say, I have all this life experience. I have all these stories to tell you. I can help. And also, I'm certified in it and I have the experience and the knowledge to help and to do all the things. Yeah.
That's great. So I want to talk about age because I've been on the planet for 7 decades, and my last book is about my journey through the 7 decades. And thank you. and it really is about the fact that there's no limit to what you can do. You can create. So why did you name the podcast that? And why was age so interesting to you?
Oh, that's such a good question. I really wanted to celebrate what people were doing at the age they were doing it. Like, I am this age, whatever the age is, and this is what I'm doing today, and this is who I am today. Rather than being, embarrassed or scared to say what your age is. I'm like, no, let's celebrate it. And the reason why I'm so interested in age, so kind of goes back to the wine industry too. This happens in a lot of industries, but of course I know the wine industry and I don't know other industries as well. Like they always come out with these publications like the top 40 under 40 and the top 30 under 30. And whatever, that's fine. It's interesting to hear whatever anybody's up to. But I was always like, I don't really care. Like, I want to know what everyone is up to who came before me. Those are the people I'm going to learn from. There's such a, wealth of experience and knowledge and wisdom. And we're not talking to those people. We're just talking to the people who are younger, who, people in your 20s, like, great, amazing. It's inspiring to see what people are doing at any age again. But, you and I both know that whatever you're doing in your 20s is going to change by the time you're in your, late 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, like it's going to change. Yeah. So
100%. In fact, you're going to be a lot of different people at those ages.
Yes, a lot of different people internally and externally. Absolutely. So I was like, why aren't we talking to people as much who are, of the generations before us? What a missed opportunity. Like, what are we doing? And I think it's, something that we miss as a society as a whole here in the United States. I think it's different. What I've learned is it's different in other cultures. Mm-hmm. And in this culture, it's like we're so focused on youth and anti-aging and just chasing youth. And like, newsflash, you can't, you're never going to catch up to your youth. Like, that's not a thing that happens. Anti-aging is BS, we're all aging from the moment that we're born. And I've had a couple of people on my podcast recently. The episodes are coming out in the next like month or so, who are like, who've started this ageism movement, or this movement around ageism. This woman who wrote a book, Ashton Applewhite, she wrote a book called This Chair Rocks, and it's great. And she says in the book, like, we discriminate. It's like the last ageism that exists, and we discriminate against the very thing that we're all trying to achieve, which is growing older.
Well,
Anyway,
and gaining wisdom. Yeah, and because you gain wisdom with age, hopefully.
Some people do.
Yeah, I do think it's a choice, but I think that we are aging, and I mean, I feel like your aging is a beauty. It's a gift. And so you can, like, for me, the way I express part of my creativity is through clothes, and I like makeup, and I change hair, and I have wigs, and I do stuff like that because it makes me happy. But I'm just as comfortable with no makeup on and my jeans and a t-shirt running around with my dogs, and knowing that I can't do in my 70s what I did in my 20s physically as much as I would love to, but I can take care of my body. So that's awesome. And so how did you find guests when you first started?
Oh my God. When I first started, it was all people I knew. My very first guest, it's still one of my very favorite stories. The actual episode, if I could go back and like redo it, I would edit it a lot. I didn't edit it at all. And now I edit my podcast like heavily. But I didn't know how to edit. I didn't know what I was doing. It's a very long episode, but it's this woman. I grew up with her daughter, and she is I don't know if she currently is, but I wouldn't be surprised if she still is. She's in her 70s, in her mid 70s. And she, when I interviewed her, was the current world champion in her age bracket, current Ironman world champion in her age bracket. So she was like I think she was like 71 or something. I can't remember. When I interviewed her, 71, 72, something like that. Now she's like 77-ish. But she's still like, we keep in touch. She's wonderful. And she's still running races and marathons and winning everything. It's incredible. She didn't start running until she was in her late 40s. She started running marathons, I think, in her 50s, maybe at 50, something around there. She didn't start her first triathlon was in her 60s, and she did not know how to swim yet. So her first triathlon was like one of those little like try for funs, like the short ones. And the swim part was in a swimming pool. And she said what she would do was like, she'd do like the breaststroke and like stand up and take a breath, and then like a breaststroke and stand up. Because she didn't know how to swim. Now she's the Ironman world champion, the Hawaii Ironman world champion, like the big one. She's swimming, I think it's 2 miles in the ocean. And winning, it's a I can't remember how long the bike is for an Ironman. It's like 50 something miles bike, through like the hills of the Big Island in Hawaii, a 2-mile swim in the ocean, and then it's a marathon. You're running a marathon after that. Anyway, she's incredible. So that was my very first episode. But yeah, I just knew people, I just would reach out. And in the beginning, I was just like, I'll just put an episode out whenever I have one, because that was the only way I was going to start, because I was like putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. And I didn't have the confidence. And I was like, it's never going to sound like the podcasts I listen to. They're all so incredible and highly produced. And at that time, I was mostly listening to like highly produced podcasts, like NPR podcasts and things like that. And I had to let a lot of that go. I have several coaches, and one of them was like, what would it feel like to just put an episode out tomorrow? And I'm like, boy, that would be such a relief. And I did. I put it out the next day, and I was, it's so much like perfectionism and all that, trying to let go and just, I had to give myself permission to just, because I thought like, oh, it has to be on a schedule. I have to put one out every single week. I don't know how to do that. I don't have enough guests. What am I going to do? And so I was like, at the time it was just a passion project. So I was like, I could just put one out whenever I want to. I'm doing this for me, and hopefully someone else, will benefit. If this helps one other person, then that is a success in my mind. And now, of course, it's a much more regular thing. And now it's a lot easier to get guests.
What I love about what you're saying is it's not about the numbers, it's about the people that you touch.
That's right. That's exactly right.
So how do people find you?
So you can find me. The easiest place is my website, mollysider.com. And that's like apple cider, but with an S instead of a S as in Sam. And everything's on there. You can find a link to my podcast there. You can, if you're someone who I'm actually taking a couple of clients right now. So if you're somebody out there who's like, I know I want to do something different. I don't know what that is, but I know I don't want to be where I am anymore, where I am right now anymore. Those are the types of people I love working with. You can contact me through my website. Yeah, that's the easiest place.
So I ask my guests the same last question. This show is called Women Awakening. What do you think is the one thing, the most important thing about women awakening at this moment on the planet?
I love this question. I think, the thing that I talk about the most, telling your story, which again, really just means like talking about yourself to someone. So I'm not saying go on a stage. You don't have to do that. But I think so many people, and especially women, think we don't have anything to say or to contribute, or our stories are not meaningful. And I'm here to tell you that that's not true. Like, you have something to say, and it's not only going to, if you talk about it, it's not only going to be incredibly helpful and impactful for yourself to get to the bottom of your own identity, but it's going to help someone else too. So share it, speak your voice, find people to talk to, listen to other people, but mostly, like, you do have a story and it matters.
Yes. Oh, that is so awesome. Well, Molly, I'm happy to know you. I'm happy to know what you're doing, and that you're inviting people to step into their hearts and authenticity and bring their voices to the planet. So thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. It's a pleasure to talk to you. And I love what you're doing here. And just like okay, to get a little woo-woo, but like your energy as you're talking to me, like even just through this Zoom, is like it's just magnificent. It's just magnificent. I love it. So keep doing what you're doing. I love it.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, ladies. So I'm going to say the same thing I say to you every week in a different way. You are a masterpiece in the making. You are a dynamic expression of the universe, a divine spark. Therefore, you've come on this planet to shine, to share, to move, to create, to inspire. Make no mistake about it. The guests that you're seeing here are just showing you that the possibilities, the doors of possibilities are infinite, and you can step through them. So please come back and meet another woman next week, because I always get excited about meeting them. You can go to cynthiajames.net if you want to see what I'm doing, or join my classes, or work with me one-on-one. But most importantly, know that your voice matters, that you make a difference. I'm so grateful to know you. I love you, and I will see you next week.